Hello, everyone. My name is Thein. I'm the founder of Non-urbanism. We are very, very excited to have all of you here, our collaborative members, our colleagues, our families, and other NGO representatives and activists. Gideon, our co-member, is here to take all of your questions during the presentations and, of course, the entire duration of this webinar. Please use the raise your hand button or drop a question in our chat or Q&A section. He will be able to collect all of the questions and raise them to the panelists or answer it directly for you, considering he's a core member of this organization. This presentation is also being streamed live on our YouTube page. You will find the link in the chat box and in all our social media handles to view it at a later time. Our core member Neeta is here to coordinate our social media interactions. If you're joining us from YouTube or our Instagram or Facebook pages, please comment or DM so that Neeta will be able to reach out to you and transfer the queries here to us in Zoom. She has specifically left me instructions to announce to all our attendees to use hashtag non-urban dialogue or hashtag call for non-urban ideas when you share about the webinar on your Instagram or Facebook, your social media pages. Today, for the next 1.5 hours, we will be having some insightful presentations by our international expert panel, who will be assessing some of your entries. We assume all the participants who registered already are here with us today, along with prospective participants for the call for non-urban ideas. The call for non-urban ideas is a competition that has been running for the past month and is on a quest to find some great proposals for the rural. Today's topic of discussion, approaching non-urban areas and communities, experts narratives, is expected to introduce you to some of our panelists' stories, narratives and tools, methodologies, best practices. As the founder of this movement that is working towards building on the strengths of rural areas, I'm extremely thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Alice Buoli. Hello, Dr. Alice.
Hello. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'm doing
We're all
good.
from different time zones, so yes. If you would allow me to introduce you, then we can go straight to the presentation.
Sure. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Buoli is an adjunct professor of urban planning and analysis at the School of Architecture, Planning and Engineering here at Politecnico di Milano. She has taught us, me and Gideon, in year 1 of her master's. She teaches very many research classes at the doctoral and master's level and regularly conducts these research seminars and workshops on urban issues with particular attention to the Euro-Mediterranean context, African urbanism, and borderlands. She has been an experienced Marie Curie researcher at the Estonian Academy of Arts and collaborates with many top journals, including the Planum. So I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Alice Buoli. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna share my screen. Meanwhile, I hope you can, everybody can see that. Well, first of all, thank you so much to Non-urbanism fantastic team for this invitation. I'm really happy to be here today with colleagues and participants and prospect participants to the call. So really, thank you so much. I'm gonna briefly give you some let's say insights or some ideas about my interpretation or let's say my experience also on this specific field on which the call is focused. And I, let's say, proposed this kind of in-between reading, meaning that to the, let's say, rural or non-urban field, I would like also to include the urban as a potential element of interest. And that's why my main point will be about the, let's say, the interaction and the interfaces between the rural plus the urban. So not versus, not opposite to, but as in a synergic dimension and relationship. First of all, I would like to introduce a bit this idea of the interface by mentioning the work and this specific quotation from James Corner about the relevance of the edge, meaning the boundary or the interface between different systems, which usually is the most interesting and most rich place where different, let's say, fields and different systems interact. Of course, there is there might be competition, there might be conflict, but there's also the space for, let's say, think about and envision multiplicity and possible interactive exchanges. So one main element that I would like to bring to you as a focus, as an element of interest, is the idea of the interface, of the boundary between different systems. And that's something that we've seen very much. This is an image from Marrakesh. I'm currently teaching a urban design studio here at Polimi, focused on the city of Marrakesh. And this idea of the in-between, not only in between, let's say, the urban and the rural, but also as a major lens. But what I wanted to bring here to the discussion is also this idea of, let's say, of the interactive exchange between the urban and the rural, and something that we've experienced, I would say, almost in any city in very different contexts. But I would like also to frame a bit my intervention on specifically also on some institutional debates, and in particular on the UN Habitat work and agenda on the urban-rural linkages. And I think that these 10 entry points that the UN Habitat has proposed in 2017 are very interesting and very relevant for our work, and also maybe and hopefully for the participants to the call. There are 4 main elements in these 10 that I really would like to focus on, and which are basically related to, let's say, the spatial dimension of the interactions and on the exchanging among the interfaces. So the relevance of exchanging products, services, information and knowledge among urban and rural areas. The relevance and importance of mobility and migration across such field, the current urbanization or rural urbanization dynamics occurring in certain specific spaces, but also with the role of small and intermediate towns in such interfaces. And finally, the role of planning, our role as, let's say, as urban designers, as urban planners, as architects, to envision an integrated urban and rural development. And to address such points, I'm going to show you an experience on which I was involved in the past year and a half, which is a project that has been carried out at the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies, but also including other departments at our university, and which was funded by the Polysocial Award program, which is the social responsibility program of Polimi, and was funded also by the Italian Cooperation Agency in Mozambique, in the city of Maputo. And that this project was specifically focused on a region, or on the metropolitan region of Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, and we addressed such let's say rural-urban interfaces, interactions, also from a territorial planning perspective. So let me just introduce very quickly the context. We are in the southeastern area of region of the African continent. Maputo specifically is located in the southern part of Mozambique, very close by to South Africa and Eswatini. So basically at the border between also different countries. And this is a very, very interesting area, which is crossed by by a various variety of different transcolor dimension, the role of river basins, the role of transnational bio reserves, as well as the presence of an important infrastructural corridor, which is the Maputo-Johannesburg corridor. And this context, this area specifically is characterized by a variety of issues which are very common to other cities, other metropolitan areas. But the focus of our work was specifically on the interaction between the issue of water scarcity in particular, on water competition, the effect of climate change on also food production and deforestation, the lack of clean and let's say affordable energy sources, and finally the effect of rapid urbanization on a territory that we defined as a fragile territory. And we addressed this kind of rural urban territorial framework from a threefold lens. So the lens of the WEF nexus, so the water, energy and food nexus, which was relevant for us as an interdisciplinary research group, but also in relation to the current debates also on urban development, rural urban development in the global south. We specifically address this kind of lens in terms of analytical framework, but also to propose some new visions, some new scenarios at the territorial scale from a territorial planning perspective. Again, this is the main field on which we work. So let's say specifically kind of transect crossing coming from Maputo, the biggest urban area, going towards South Africa and Eswatini, crossing a series of very small villages and medium-sized town along this path. And what you see here is also the main agroecological system that we address, the system of the Umbeluzi River, with a different variety of, let's say, landscapes also that and rich territorial and natural resources that are part of this system. So just to give you some images of the place, of this context, as I said, is a very rich and very beautiful area of the country, which is crossed by agroecological infrastructures from one side, and of course human and based activities, in this case of agricultural, along the river, along the riverside. At the same time, we experienced and we had the chance to know a series of projects which also are very much related to the idea of innovative food production. And so the role of innovation from local entrepreneurs in developing their own ways of producing and let's say taking care of their territory, which we involved in our project. And also the role of the logistic of the food production. In this case, this is an image of the central market of Maputo. Unfortunately, most of these products are not being produced in the metropolitan area of Maputo, but come from South Africa. And so there is also an issue of equal access to food and also affordability of food resources, which we addressed in our project too. And finally, the issue of education. So the importance of training new generations of local entrepreneurs working in a rural field, feeding their own territory and feeding the city or feeding the other, let's say, urban settlement along the same section that I was showing. So our proposal for this specific territory, which I would like to bring to the discussion together and might give you also some ideas, some hints to our participants, is the idea of interpolating, overlapping the two systems, so the agro and the ecological system, let's say trying to improve the overall food system, the food production chain from the from the rural to the urban and vice versa, address the water management in the region as a crucial asset to develop the production, but also to develop let's say a fair access to such resource, and to overlap to it a off-grid energy infrastructure able to sustain the growth of the overall region. And in this sense, we developed an agenda of actions of like sample actions, so not specifically focused on some areas that can be translated and also envisioned in different part of the specific part of the Maputo region, in which we try to overlap the different systems and identifying relevant nodes on which develop a, let's say, an integrated and long-term sustainable development. So that's my contribution to the discussion, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alice. It was very, it was a wonderful presentation, and the graphics and the content and how we went about it was definitely, I believe, was be very informational for all the participants who are here, and of course the listeners who are joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you so much, Dr. Alice. And yes, thank you for putting it right in the beginning where you said it's not against, but together. That is exactly what we're trying to establish here at Non-Urbanism as well. Moving on with the second presentation by Mr. Eko, who's joined us from Indonesia. Mr. Eko is a product of Gajah Mada University in Indonesia and the Belage Institute in the Netherlands. He's an architect, an artist, an educator who runs his own studio, the Eko Prawoto Architecture Workshop in Java, Indonesia, where he often works directly with the local builders and craftsmen to understand and design for the region. Along with this, he teaches at the Dattawakana Christian University in the Yogyakarta city. He's had numerous installations displayed at Venice Architecture Biennale, the Esplanade in Singapore, among others. How are you doing, Mr. Eko?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us here. Yes, thank you, Mr. Eko. Please we cannot wait to start the presentation.
Okay, yeah, thank you. What about I'm to present is maybe not very scientific. It's just a small sharing, or just it's more like my personal reflection actually, which I have not really supported by sufficient data or information, but it's more how to say, based on my experience in the last few years. I live in the village, and how I see the so-called problem, and try in a way to make a small intervention as part of my practice, and how to activate, so to say, the rural area in different way. Okay, I will start with this one. I believe that this in the context of Indonesia, this period of transformation is very important. So we have been struggling with a lot of problem, politically, economically, socially, culturally, and it's because the fact that we are as a nation consists of so many tribes, so to say, or ethnic group, more than 500 or maybe like 700 ethnic group with their own different languages, and scattered in so many islands, and this kind of rich variety is very apparent. And the tension between uh, city and the rural area is also very, very big. And in this kind of modernization process, which is, I think it's not very, uh, how to say, uh, still asymmetrical, very, very asymmetrical. So we talk about Java, the main island, with outside Java, or even the cities in Java, and also the rural area around it. So it's very very big, and the village is always considered as um, pocket of poverty. So most of the poverty are scattered around the village, and now, even now, the rural area, what I see, it's got a very huge pressure. It's from outside the process of modernization, and also the industrialization process, which is mainly come from the city, uh, and also there is some cultural or social crisis what is happening inside the village. um, what I see, I call it as a second phase of urbanism or urbanization. Sorry, this is uh, mistype. Um, what I mean, before, uh, many people from the rural area migrate to the city to find jobs. Now it's still happening, but the second phase, it's more that the urban influence or the values, the lifestyle, and the consumption uh, are influencing intensely to the rural area because of media, television, and something like that. So intensely, the urban lifestyle influences the rural area, and it's make the asymmetrical growth, or the tension is even bigger. The city is getting bigger and bigger, uncontrolled. It's like swallowing the villages around it, and also extracting or taking the resources from the village, like a hungry giant. Um, Socially, it's also what is happening is the younger generation is more attracted or oriented their thinking or their life or their dream toward the city, and they don't like to work in the village. They don't want to be villagers. They just want to go outside to work somewhere else where the money is more available, rather than continuing their parents' work as farmers, or as maybe artisan, or craftsmen, or other professions. Uh, so now the villagers consist of mostly old people and very young people, but the younger generation in the productive age is mostly uh, going out to the bigger city. Uh, and now, if we relate with the problem of food, for instance, it might be um, in danger. We might face crisis in the near future, because uh, since the farmer are not able to continue the knowledge to their generation, to the younger generation, it means that the farmers have become less and less, and also the rice field is also decreasing, and within that, the knowledge how to cultivate the land, and the knowledge related with the agriculture, it seems like cut off, or not able to be continued. And at the same time, what is happening there, culture, local culture, or it's also become a little bit dimmed, and the self-esteem it's becoming smaller and smaller. They are not very proud with their own cultural identity, for instance. Of course, there's some programs that try to push it up and try to make it alive and grow again. But it's a kind of uh, tension between uh, asymmetrical power, and it's very tough, I think, what we experience here. But I think if we relate with our situation now, especially related with the pandemic, rural culture, I think, still have some important role because they have some knowledge. Uh, I believe that this pandemic time is giving us enough reflection, and that we hear the message from the universe, from the nature, that we have to rethink or reconsider the way we deal with the environment or with the nature, and we have to find a better way to be more caring, and if possible we have to heal or to make the environments better. But at the same time, we our modern knowledge is not sufficient to do that. We lost our knowledge how to live peacefully or in harmony with the nature. And so I think we have to learn again that kind of knowledge. And and I believe that the knowledge is still there in the village area. So we have to think how uh, to collect again the knowledge which is scattered all around in those tribes or in those ethnic culture everywhere. I think this is very important. Um, the knowledge to live in harmony with the nature is very important. It is more than just agriculture or the uh, how to produce food, but it's more the whole knowledge how they able to work and to understand on, and how to uh, uh, yeah, to appreciate also the existence of the nature. It's not like the idea of the industry, which is very greedy and try to control or to uh, just to squeeze the nature very how to say, very greedy. um, Life in the village is more simple. I think it's also very valuable in for us in for the near future, because we have to now we have to live in a more aware with the limitation of the resources. So the method to live with a very minimal resources to consume less, I think it's very important. And in the village area, we still feel that kind of strong sense of the spirit of collective living, the spirit of togetherness, and strong sense of solidarity. I think this kind of social capital is very important for the uh, to make better life in the future, because we cannot uh, change something individually, but we have to make a kind of movement to share or to spread that idea to uh, to to in a larger area or larger population, and it needs the spirit of solidarity and togetherness. And there is some knowledge and the scale to work with local material is still very much exists in the uh, in the village, in the rural area, like many different kind of organic materials. It's still very much there. I mean, not really based on industrial materials, but it's based on a craft or that kind of knowledge is still there. And compared to the urban area, I think rural areas still have more privilege in terms of good air quality, it's greener, and no pollution, something like that. But now it's changing very fast because the infrastructure is also improved and it attracts many newcomers, and also the relationship with the city is getting very close now because the city expands very fastly, and the land price is also becoming higher and higher. uh, because of the land prices higher and higher, it also make the villagers eager to sell their land, and it's make the situation, I think, worse because now they have uh, no more land as before, for instance. So I think the situation should be improved. That's how we have to find the method and the way, and which is, I think, more based on awareness about the sustainable environment. Is more sustainable, but also more just. Not in the perspective of uh, urban uh, uh, urban side, which is try to grow and try to get more stuff to or to feed or to fulfill their need, but it should be in a more balanced relationship, I think, because I believe that rural area is not just supporting facilities for urban life. It's as now we perceive it. It should be more treated as a equal counterpart or equal base, uh, and I'm very much agree with Dr. Buoli, who proposed that there should be a kind of a dialogue or a, a balanced relationship between rural and urban. I think it's in this direction. Um, Here's some images that I found near my place, how to express the spirit of or the life force of the village. It's a very simple but appropriate. For instance, there's a kind of intelligence or creativity which may be rather different with what we experience or what we saw in a urban area. And this the ability to find a solution or the tolerance or the flexibility is it's very much there, I think. um, and the spirit of life, the survival energy, the creative energy is it's very much there, I think. This for me is a kind of quality, the cultural or social capital, which is should be kept, I think. And the spirit of making rather than the spirit of consuming, this very important. In the last few years, 5, 6 years, I've been living in the village, and this is what I am trying to do now. It's working with villagers with a different kind of knowledge, and try to appreciate uh, their skill set and try to make something. So as an architect, it is not that this is my design, but it's just try to use the available knowledge, the available materials, and try to make something, discuss with them, and with a simple tools, something. So this a kind of experiment, actually. Try to find what might be the the local architecture language for the village. Of course, that they need something different or something new, but in a way, I try to find something which is based on their uniqueness. Yeah, yeah. Try to some handmade detail with the simple materials, and try to respect the nature, and try to use a very simple technique or way. And this is one of like a building that I built in that area with them, with local material like wood or bamboo or woven bamboo or something like that. And this is another thing that I've been doing. I think it's also important to try to find the pieces of local knowledge, uh, and this in this thing I try to collect the collective memory or the collective skill set which related in the making of agriculture tools and carpenter tools, or in other tools for supporting their life. That kind of product is still very much there in the village, but now it's of course under threat with the plastic product, of course. But still, somewhere there, and I try to collect it, and also this kind of working tools with produced by them. Uh, I call it the Museum of Ordinary Things. This is a kind of important references that we should use it as thinking about how to develop that kind of things, the available knowledge and the available skill set for the future. And this is a kind of my conclusion now, that of course rural areas should be improved or modernized, but we have to respect their unique potential socially, culturally, and environmentally. And rural areas should not be perceived as not yet urban, and that's why we should not be urbanized or following urban as a model for development. But rural areas should I think encourage to define their own concept or model of development. Yeah, thank you very much.
Mr. Echo, I don't know where to start from the presentation that we heard just now. It was beautiful, the pictures and content and what you told us, especially concerning the creativity and the uniqueness and the flexibility of solutions in the rural created by the people, by the residents. I think that's one of the main causes that we're thinking not reflected in the agendas and policies, and it's not, the flexibility is not available. And we thank you so much for this presentation, and I hope all the participants enjoyed listening to Mr. Echo. But thank you so much, Mr. Echo. Thank you. Moving on to the next presentation, I'm very, very happy to introduce Mr. Antonio.
Hi.
Mr.
Hi.
Hi. How are you today?
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to introduce him. Mr. Antonio Blanco Pasta is a graduate of the European University of Madrid and the University of Malaga, Spain. He teaches various classes at the master's level, particularly in the Master of Architecture and Urbanism program at the Manchester School of Architecture. As an architect, he has developed special interest in ruralism and currently non-urbanism as well, I hope, and history, which feeds into his current thesis. He's a PhD candidate on garden cities in the British context. We thank you so much, Mr. Antonio. Please, let's have the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'm going to share. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss with you this amazing topic, which is non-urbanism. In my case, I'm going to present, my presentation is about ruralism and the main issues that more and more rural areas are facing as a result of a migration process of people into urban areas. And to be more specific, I will explain the impact of this phenomenon on rural communities in decline in Spain. And I will outline some principles taken from the Garden City model in the UK. As part of the doctoral thesis I am currently doing, that in order to provide some alternatives and initiatives that could help to overcome this situation in the future. So, as you can see in this slide, in 1900, most spaces within Spain didn't exceed 20 inhabitants per square kilometer, and there were no significant urban centers. But rather Spanish territory was mainly composed of communities that maintain a certain demographic and social balance throughout the whole country. In contrast, a century later and even now, the Spanish territory is scarcely populated, with municipal densities well below those considered critical, such as 5 inhabitants per square kilometer and 10 inhabitants per square kilometer. Well, on this map, we can see how the areas below these numbers dominate the northern half of the country, giving an insight, for example, into what a demographic desert means. Well, this map and this situation is in part as a result of the globalized world in which we live, where cities concentrate most of the means of production to the detriment of rural settlements. Well, within the European context, as you can see in this map, the population distribution of Spain is facing one of the most dramatic situations. So even only comparable to the situation of Norway or Sweden or Greece, for example, despite having one of the best climate conditions of Europe. So in this context, there are plenty of examples of small rural communities in decline in Spain, like these small villages located in the provinces of Huesca, Teruel, and Segovia, which share quite similar main issues like population shrinkage, lack of production, shortage of amenities, bad infrastructure, no internet access, and aging population. However, these communities tried to implement some initiatives 20 years ago to overcome this situation somehow. So in the case of Puerto Las in Huesca, one of its current inhabitants who came from the city 20 years ago, he started sharing his experience on the internet, and some families decided to move to the village thanks to the social media. In the case of Camañas in Teruel, in 2001, the village council decided to take action against the continued abandonment of people, and by fostering something like a campaign to attract South American immigrants. And in less than 20 years, the village went from having 3 students in the school to having 14 students in the school, which is, according to the former mayor of Camañas, one of the best indicator of a new hope for the village. In the case of Barahona de Fresno in the province of Segovia, in 2007, an investor purchased almost the whole village for tourist development, but without any significant impact until he decided to release for sale of the village in 2017. And in the case of Purroy in Teruel, during the 90s, the inhabitants of Purroy decided to offer free housing for any young couple who wanted to move there. But despite of all the efforts of many families who moved to the village, there are just 19 people living there today. So far, these initiatives are not being successful enough to attract a large number of people to these communities. So the question is, how could we do it? So this question, in my view, raises a series of questions, such as, how could we overcome this situation without any public funding? How could we foster the resilience of rural settlements to cope with their isolation from the globalized world? How could we conserve, transform, and update existing rural areas in fulfilling the needs of likely future rural communities? And finally, how could we encourage the decentralization of people and means of production into rural areas, which is, in my view, one of the most important questions to be answered in this context. So in response to these questions, and mainly in response to the last one, the town-country model, also known as the Garden City model, devised by Ebenezer Howard in 1898, represented a feasible alternative of an initiative to establish rural communities from scratch and to attract people and means of production into rural areas, somehow into rural areas. And to describe the advantages of the town-country model, Howard proposed the creation of a new magnet, which is the magnet that you can see at the bottom of the picture, by showing the best advantages of town and country, such as beauty of nature, social opportunity, fields and parks of easy access, low rents, low rates, low prices, and field for enterprise. And well, according to Howard, a garden city should be composed by large parks, houses with gardens, boulevards, railway connection, and open areas for farmland and other purposes. Well, just 5 years after he proposed this idea through the publication of Tomorrow, a company was founded in the UK in 1903 to transform 4,000 acres of farmland into the garden city of Letchworth that we have today, whose achievement to attract people and means of production into the town was mainly because of 3 main aspects, in my view, which are its financial system, its land tenure system, and its planning schemes. Well, regarding its financial system, a joint stock company was founded in 1903 to develop the settlement. Its net profits of the company were divisible on the one hand of 5% of a dividend per year, a maximum of 5% per year for the members of the company, and the surplus of the net profits were saved by the company for public purposes, such as the construction of a railway station, public buildings, hospitals, lighting, water supply, gardening, amusement, and even for the embellishment of the town. This way, the financial system of the company was relied on a self-financing system without, for example, any government expenditure on infrastructure. Well, regarding its land tenure system, the company decided to establish a dual system in which the land is held in trust by the company, whereas the buildings can be owned or rented by people. So, in other words, the inhabitants of Letchworth were from the beginning leaseholders or freeholders of the buildings or of the properties, but they were not allowed to own the land in order to avoid land speculation and secure the affordability of houses. So with regard to the planning schemes, the architects, Barry Parker and Raymond Angwin, designed a master plan for Letchworth in 1903 according to the following principles. They located the station in the core of the town in between of the pre-existing park of Norton Common and the pre-existing two big plane trees on the south of the station. So through the preservation of these natural elements and the station, they created a big network of a tree-lined corridor and big squares as a means to connect all the main roads of the residential industrial areas with the town center within a maximum of 15 minutes walking distance. Within the residential areas, the architects proposed the design of the layout of houses in an informal way in order to create something like a picturesque townscape throughout the whole town, such as this example of Letchworth, where the cluster of houses are composed by different groups of housing typologies by providing the variety of the townscape. Its junctions and village greens provide a play of outline to avoid the creation of rows and its subsequent sense of monotony, and the combination of both provides the intricacy of the townscape, representing the rural informality of the garden city and shaping the residential areas as a group of hamlets. Well, in short, the main aim of my the idea I proposed through my thesis is to adapt and to tailor these principles to the rural context in Spain, in order to provide some a feasible alternative aimed at providing, for example, good infrastructure, amenities, affordable housing in rural areas, for example, for those who cannot afford the more and more expensive prices for example, for buying a house or something like this in the urban areas, and as a pull effect to attract people and means of productions into rural areas. So this way, small rural settlements of today, with the problems I mentioned before, in addition to abandoned buildings and neglected spaces, and like this example, can be redesigned and expanded in order to become prosperous, sustainable, self-reliant, and affordable communities across the countryside. So I hope these examples and the Garden City model could be or can be a good inspiration for completing your proposals in this competition, or maybe you want to research in depth on this case study, which is amazing, to maybe for future rural proposals on rural development and or town planning. So thank you very much for listening and looking forward to seeing your proposal soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Antonio. In regards to opportunities and the policies, I think how one can intervene spatially has been done very, very beautifully, and I think the participants really enjoyed the presentation. We thank you so much. Now moving on to our beloved Dr. Tachi's presentation. Dr. Tachi, I'm not able to see you. Dr. Tachi, are you here?
Yes, I'm here trying to share my screen. Just a minute.
Yes. Dr. Tachi, if you would allow me, I would like to introduce you first, and then we can definitely.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Tachi is an experienced lecturer at the KNUST University, Ghana. Prior to this, he taught for 4 years at the School of Environmental Planning and the University of Northern British Columbia, Canada. He has published quite extensively in the areas of development policy, urban policy, rural development, environmental impact assessment, and social policy planning. Apart from his academic influence, he has held a number of positions at the consultancy and administrative levels. It's truly an honor to have Dr. Tachi here with us, our mentor and a really, really close, respected professor for our members. Thank you so much, Dr. Tachi, for joining us here.
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me clearly.
I do. I hope everybody can hear.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
So
you.
since the introduction has been done, let me go straight to the point. I actually designed this presentation based on the communication with the organizers. So I basically tried to conceptualize non-urban spaces for our participants to really know the scope they are working with. Then I tried to identify some of the needs of non-urban spaces. Then I also came out with one project that I've done personally, that it also led to a research work that has been published in the African Geographical Review. Then the final part tried to respond to some queries we received from the organizers. So I'll try and capture all these aspects within the 10 minutes. Non-urbanism, especially in the global south, is a complex issue because according to the UN, non-urban areas are usually defined as what is not urban. However, there are a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to the definition of urbanization, and that makes defining non-urban areas difficult. In the context of Ghana, we define an urban area as any geographic area with a population of less than 5,000. This therefore means that any area that has below 5,000 is a non-urban area. Therefore, in most global south countries like Ghana, non-urban areas are divided into two main areas. That is, the rural areas and the peri-urban areas. Therefore, in terms of the needs of and problems of non-urban areas, I presented some for peri-urban areas, and I also presented some for rural areas, which may not be extensive, but it will serve as a guide for our participants. Generally, scholars define peri-urban areas as areas that are in transition from rural to urban. Therefore, they depict the characteristics of both rural and urban, and therefore normally serve as dormitory towns for urban areas. What are some of the major issues our participants should be looking for, especially in our global south? Issues of development control. In peri-urban areas, development normally precedes planning. Therefore, spatial planning and enforcing development control regulation is very difficult. Another major issue in the peri-urban environment is loss of agricultural land through the transmission process. As already stated, there is a transition from rural to urban. Rural areas are basically agricultural, but as the city expands and people begin to develop in these areas, there is loss and there are economic opportunities also being lost. So we need to consider these issues. There are also major environmental issues that those who are interested in environmental plan, environmental design can consider. encroachment on wetlands, loss of vegetation, and issues of waste management. Also, there are issues of infrastructural development because I've already said that development is preceding planning. Therefore, getting the requisite infrastructure is a major issue in peri-urban settlement. The final one is security issues. Let me shift to rural areas, which will be a major dominant discussion for this project. Within the global south, normally I said global south, that is what was normally referred to as developing countries. And there are depiction of characteristics in these areas. The rural areas have issues of demography, rapid population growth. In as much that the population is growing, there is rural-urban migration. Therefore, those who engage in agricultural sector as we speak now are aging, and it's a major issue in the rural areas now. There are also economic issues that we need to discuss. Policymakers, political leaders have over the years developed the rural areas through rhetoric. But the truth in the global south is that the major sector in the rural areas, which is agriculture, still experience issues such as low agricultural yield, harvest losses. There is also increase in rural poverty compared, especially in Ghana. When you compare the gap between the urban and rural poverty, it continues to increase, and we need to look at that. There are also environmental issues, forest degradation, poor waste management, and environmental pollution. It means we have to pay attention to environmental practices in rural areas. Of course, the almighty, which I think Antonio and other colleagues highlighted, infrastructural problems. And the infrastructure, normally we focus on fiscal access, but it's poor physical and economic access to facilities such as education, water, health, and sanitation. Now, let me go to the project that I did. That may serve as a lesson for our participants. We did a project which is known as redesigning the Lake Bosomtwe into an ecotourism facility. And Lake Bosomtwe is one of the artificial lakes located in the Ashanti region of Ghana. Around the lake, there are 24 rural communities, which I'll be showing you some later. And our objective was to make sure that we fully actualize the potential of a rural environment through the design of the ecotourism facility. The research team included my humble self, Stephen Apiatechi, Dr. Uswan Ponsa. Then we had two of our students joining us, Francis Redu and Nathan Tete, all of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Now, what are the major themes for our project? The first theme was to actualize the potential of rural areas. The next one was to ensure that we develop an advocacy for investment in rural areas, especially for the ecotourism facility. Also, we're also looking at sustainable design, where we look at ensuring the three-dimensional pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social development. Then the final theme was to sensitize rural dwellers to appreciate nature, as discussed by one of our colleagues, and ensure sustainable use of natural resources. Now, since we don't know the Ghanaian context, for the purpose of this study, there is the Lake Bosomtwe with the blue environment. There are 24 rural communities surrounding the Lake Bosomtwe. However, for the purpose of this study, we focused on 2 rural communities because these were the rural communities that were well linked to the urban areas. It also gives us opportunity to study the other rural communities later. However, the models we're using in Abono and Ankase will serve as a good model for the other 22 communities around the lake. Now you could see that there is an enormous potential, but as always done with rural areas, we pay attention to urban areas more than rural areas. So this potential is basically undeveloped. Investment is basically nil within the Ghanaian context. However, in the minds of the researchers, we thought that if we are to invest here, it will lead to the transformation of the rural economy and that of Ghana as a whole. Now, conceptually, as I said, we're looking at ecotourism development. Therefore, we looked at participatory development of the Bosomtwe ecotourism facility. One of the panel members highlighted clearly that we should not dictate our strategies, our ideas, and our design on rural dwellers. It is important that we co-design and co-produce with these rural dwellers. And that was what this project was about. So within the concept, we are looking at natural resource conservation whilst making sure that we improve the livelihoods of the rural dwellers and also contribute to broad national economic development. So overall, because of the time, I cannot go into detail. For those who are interested, aspects of the project has been published in the African Geographical Review. And those who I could share the link with you later, but we don't have time, so I can't go into detail. But broadly, the researchers first looked at how do we argue for the investment into such an ecotourism facility. Therefore, we first examined the socio-economic benefit, the socio-cultural benefit of the facility. And it will interest you to know that within the Ghanaian context, emanating from the Guy hypothesis, most water bodies are seen as cultural symbols. Therefore, the Lake Bosomtwe is an important cultural symbol within the Ashanti Kingdom. Therefore, its development will help actualize fully this particular cultural symbol. One of the things we noted was that rural activities in the global south, especially in Ghana, is mostly unregulated. Therefore, we've not really looked at the environmental effects of the activities of rural dwellers, in as much that the natural resource base of most economies come from the rural areas. Therefore, the researchers looked at how human activities around the lake are affecting the lake environmentally. And that's where we saw that in terms of fishing, people were using dangerous chemicals for fishing. People were using soap and other things to wash in the lake, and others are farming along the lake, but the chemicals they are using have long-term effect, and these need policy response and advocacy. Also, we looked at the economic benefits of the lake. As I said, as we speak now, investment from public authorities is nil. However, some private individuals and individuals who have money have started building along the lake. So there are a couple of hotels along the lake that is really giving employment and other opportunities to the inhabitants. Now, because the researchers didn't want a situation where we only focus on the environmental benefits of the lake, whilst we only focus on the economic benefits of the lake, whilst neglecting the social and environmental aspect, we did co-design the potential designs that should be made around the lake, looking at the cultural, economic, and environmental situation. So this, for example, is a traditional symbol to really preserve the cultural aspect of the lake, whilst you could see there are a lot of greeneries that will preserve the environment, while making sure that there are demarcation for farmlands and other activities. We also considered all sets of categories. One of the things that we are not ensuring in terms of the design of spaces is to ensure equity, especially in our part of the world. We design spaces for adults most of the time, but we sometimes forget about the children. Therefore, we're also trying to ensure equitable design within the spaces in rural environments. So you can see that there are children playing grounds dedicated for the children, accommodating safety and other issues. Those who want to walk has been taken care of, whilst those who want to relax and sit has been taken care of. Somebody will say, all this in a rural environment? Yes, for equitable development, what is deserving to the urban environment is deserving to the rural environment, based on their needs, inputs, and also what they actually will benefit from. There are also designs that we looked at. So we were looking at coming out with this design, and we've been trying over the years to advocate for investment whilst considering the ecotourism principles. And we've been getting results so far by looking at the government of Ghana and the member of parliament, inviting our team for a presentation for future redevelopment of the area into the ecotourism facilities we are looking at. Now, briefly, I don't know whether the organizers will allow me. I tried to develop some answers to some of the queries. I don't know whether this will come after or I should continue.
Professor Taki, I mean, I think we definitely have a question session in the end, but if there's something particular that you would like to go answer about following the lecture, please do, please do.
All right, thank you very much. So one of our questions was to look at tools and methodologies in approaching rural issues. And as I said, so this will guide you to really search more information about these tools. Of course, there are institutions within the rural environment that we mostly neglect, especially the informal institutions. Therefore, institutional analysis is an important tool for approaching rural issues. But as I said, mostly researchers and policymakers focus on the formal institutions whilst neglecting the informal institutions. So please pay attention to the informal institutions. Also, our own stakeholder analysis is an important aspect of rural issues, because if you don't take care, you're designing something from your urban perspective whilst neglecting the rural perspective. So we should pay attention to stakeholder analysis. The public consultation, then there are also rural appraisal methodologies and participatory rural appraisal methods. We also need socioeconomic surveys in such areas. And for us being urban designers, urban planners and architects, remote sensing and geographic information systems may help us in terms of the methods and issues. Somebody also asked about best practices in developing in an urban area. I think most of the panel discussion highlighted most of these, so I'll highlight just three. The first best practice you may consider is design and planning and developing accessible and inclusive development. And here we are not looking at the rhetoric we've been saying over and over again. We are looking at real issues where we look at the principles and apply it to whatever that we are doing. We need to also make sure that we provide the rural dwellers with the requisite knowledge, skills, and tools they need to improve their lives. For example, how does a rural dweller participate when they don't have the requisite skill to input into the project? So one of the failures of the projects that we make is that a rural dweller may not be an architect, but they have inbuilt things that they can contribute to the project. You need to provide them with some knowledge and skills, then they will help improve upon the designs and the projects that we want to do. Rural development strategy should also take into account the context and reality of rural people. Most projects have failed because of our inability to really consider the context and reality of rural people. A friend who is a sociologist lecturing in Canada now told me a story that a borehole was built. Not knowing the borehole, the distance, they thought that the rural dwellers were traveling longer distance than usual. So they were going to build a borehole nearer to the homes of the rural dwellers. Now, they didn't consult them, they didn't consider the reality and the context. So they built the borehole nearer to them. However, when they did their monitoring study, they saw that no, the youth use fetching water the longer distance as a means of social interaction. Therefore, despite the fact that they brought the borehole nearer to them, they didn't use that water source. They still travel longer distance so that they can interact with their peers. So pay attention to the context and realities. Also, sustainability is an important part of rural transformation. So let's look at the principles of sustainability in rural development issues. Then job creation in rural areas through diversification of activities. As we speak, in the global south, rural areas, young people are moving to urban centers because strategically, we tend to develop opportunities in urban centers more than rural areas. And it's obvious that people will start moving. So for us to deal with these issues, one of the best ways to make sure we create opportunities. The final query was an interesting one. And the participant asked about how to speak to relevant people, but I made it key informant. I said initial contact. You need an initial contact. You need people who are very popular. In the rural environment, especially in Ghana, there are always people that you may think are not rich, are not members of the society that you think are part of the leadership, but they have information. So you need to make initial contacts by looking at all these segments of the population. Also, tradition is very important, especially in the global south. So community entry is very important. Whatever your questions, the sequencing, you are dealing with the rural environment. Therefore, your sequencing, you need to make sure that you build trust, and also before you follow up with factual questions. So allow them to come out with their opinion before factual questions. So opinion questions before factual questions. And the wording of the questions are very important. Also use a lot of role playing. Since you are dealing with the rural environment, role playing also help you to get a lot from them. Then use the probing techniques. You need to also make sure that you have the patience, because sometimes people want to voice their opinion. You may think that they are going off track, but be patient and get the relevant information that you need from them. And also maintain a neutral attitude. Finally, the same participant asked about which people should they deal with in the rural areas? I tried to jot down, but this may not be extensive enough. I talked about community leaders. They are also professionals and residents who have first-hand language, who are in the community, and they are normally very respected. They are also traditional leaders that you cannot do without them. They are also local government officials, because most government systems globally are running the decentralized system. Surely the rural areas may have representative of governments in their scope. Youth leaders are very important. Leaders of women groups, because of feminism and other things, pay attention to that too. Then pay attention to community gatekeepers. Here, community gatekeepers are people who are benefiting from the disadvantages of the rural environment. Therefore, you need to involve them, because you are going to face what we call resistance to change, but involve them because they are already benefiting from what is going on. So pay attention to them. Finally, pay attention to key informants who may not necessarily have status in society. Then they will help you. Yeah. For the final question, somebody asked, why are rural areas struggling to develop? The first comment I made was that limited capacity and social networks. Now, you need, in a democratic society, you need the capacity to negotiate. Therefore, rural areas normally don't have the capacity to negotiate. Therefore, if they don't have the capacity, then it means their development will be behind those. Also, because literacy level is low, especially in the global south, the social networks, especially people going to school, community leaders, knowing people who can bring development, is limited in rural areas. And that's why we should pay attention to these areas. I also mentioned resistance to change. There are people who are benefiting from the development of rural areas. Therefore, pay attention, because it is leading to why the areas are struggling. I also think that over years, policymakers, researchers, and even political leaders have reduced rural development strategies to rhetoric instead of action. So everybody says they love the rural areas. Everybody says they understand the potentials and opportunities in rural areas. However, nobody has been able to come out with a model that will truly transform rural areas. So we need to shift from that rhetoric and look at that. Actors in urban centers normally determine the value of rural output. So for example, in Ghana, rural farmers will farm, and it's the market women in urban areas who determine how much they pay for the rural product. So it's not surprising that the rural areas will struggle, whilst those who have not farmed will make their profit. The potentials of rural economy has not been fully actualized, as our project showed. There is this massive resource there, but nobody is paying attention to. Trust me, if Lake Bosomti was supposed to be in any urban center, it would have been developed. Also, I think that over time, in the global south especially, there is ineffective application of the principles of social justice and equity in the delivery of basic services. For example, why should people be writing the same exams, but the quality of delivery and infrastructure in rural areas is different from that of the urban centers? I believe that there are certain things that should be equitable, because they are writing the same exam, so infrastructure and everything, education infrastructure, accessibility should be the same. But there are such other things that may not be the same. However, for things like education, health, and other things should be the same, so that it will promote that social justice that we are talking about. But that is not the case. We constantly talk about the gap between the rural and the urban area, but we constantly continue to invest in the urban areas. So we have to pay attention to the principles of social justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tachi. I think the methodology with which how you went about the presentation, I recommend all the participants to please revisit in our YouTube link. But in the interest of time, I would really like to introduce our last and final speaker, our mentor, Sudhir sir. Sudhir sir, yes.
Hello?
Yes, hello, sir.
Yes.
Please allow me to introduce you, Mr. Sudhir. Mr. Sudhir is an experienced architect, activist, and a tutor at People's Architecture Commonweal, Chennai, India. He has held several positions and led numerous national projects, such as the state government's pilot rural housing project, implemented in 5 villages of Dindikal Anna district between 1988 and 90. He's well known for his advocacy endeavors and is currently working to resist the enclosure of customary livelihoods and the commons in India. It's truly a pleasure to introduce you, Sudhir sir, and thank you so much for accepting to have a presentation with us today.
You're welcome, Thein. In fact, and it's an honor to share with such a distinguished panel and a young group of youngsters, you see, with these ideas, right? And it's a topic that's close to my heart, and I hope I will be able to contribute in positive ways. Yeah? I would like to, how do you say, present a recent involvement of a group of young people I was working with, you see, and I guided in a study of, you see, proposals to expand infrastructure, especially port infrastructure, on the periphery of the of Chennai city, where I live, yeah, on the eastern coast of the Bay of Bengal, right? And this project is still not, how do you say, cleared. Yeah, I would like to show a few slides about the project and its impact on the villages and the customary livelihoods of the people staying in those villages. Yeah? And at the end of this of my presentation, I would like to an opportunity to answer some of the questions that participants had written into non-urbanism. Right? I think it's very clear that from the 4 presentations already made, you see, that the variety of you see contexts are going to be extremely, you see, diverse. Yeah? Very different contexts we are seeing, except that I'm sure that there are many similarities, like Dr. Chakti mentioned and Eco also pointed out, you see, with the rural areas in the global south. Yeah? And I think the experience of India, especially in the neoliberal phase of its you see, development, beginning from the early 90s, approximately 30 years ago, yeah, there has been immense pressure on you see, on the rural hinterland, you see, to cater to the needs and wants of urban centers, right, which have grown extremely rapidly. There's been an explosion in the growth of cities, yeah, and like I mean, Eco pointed out, it has this growth is asymmetric, you see, and it has taken away physical resources, including water, river sand, yeah, I mean various minerals, yeah, and I mean all sorts of, including farm produce. So the entire how do you say, system of production is geared to basically supplying the wants primarily of urban consumers. And over the last 20 years, I think the levels of consumption that urban centers reflect, yeah, have, I mean, certainly led to all sorts of problems which are, I mean, clearly reflected. Yeah. One, in our climate emergency, you see, and 2, in the environmental degradation that we are facing, which has led to the 6th great extinction of species, right? And the fact that, you see, large swaths of our environment, natural environment, are poisoned, you see, with chemicals and, you see, all sorts of contaminants. And it's not something that is, it's a problem that is only, how do you say, limited to rural areas, but it's now at our doorsteps, you see, for those living in urban centers, you see. And as Echo pointed out, I think the pandemic has brought home to us, you see, the fact that we are pushing limits, and there is, I mean, there's probably, you see, a lot of rethinking that needs to be done. Yeah. So let me, I mean, share the slides with you about the proposed project, and from that, I maybe, I mean, to answer some of the questions, will generalize you see, the insights from the study that I'm going to, you see. Okay, can you see the?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the outline of the proposed expansion to the Kartupalli port, you can see marked in red here. See, and it covers approximately around about 4,000 acres of land, which are primarily wetlands and part of the estuary of a major river. I'm dragging my cursor along the river, Kosastalayar. Yeah. The river has one estuary which basically drains out in the Ennore Creek here, and then it moves northwards approximately around about 14 kilometers before it reaches one of the largest brackish water lakes in the on this coast, you see. And the project also aims to take approximately around about 2,000 acres of land to be, 2,000 acres of land to be reclaimed from the sea by dredging and dumping earth into the sea. Okay? So this project is surrounded by several villages who are living in this estuarine region, yeah, all along the western side of the, you see, of this river course, right? And they are involved in agriculture as well as in grazing and herding, yeah. And there are fishing communities which are living along the coast here, yeah. And there are inland fishing communities which are living as part of the village communities on the western side of the river, right? So you can see that this estuarine area basically is a brackish water ecology, yeah? And it's brackish because it's low-lying, and there is an exchange of water with the sea. So it's a home to an ecology that is that's extremely specific, yeah. It's very rich with marine life, including fish and prawn, and crabs and all sorts of crustaceans, you see. And people have been fishing in these waters, yeah. I will show you pictures of how they fish with very little infrastructure, you see, and hardly any boats, or they are walking into the river, which is not more than 5 feet deep, you see, even during the monsoons, yeah. And they're able to catch fish fish and prawn with their bare hands, you see. And they use small baskets in which to collect the fish, yeah. And a person might spend maybe 3 or 4 hours, catching fish by hand, yeah? And maybe net something like 15 kilos, yeah, 15 kilos or so of fish. This was around about, say, 25, 30 years ago. Today, the same amount of time would yield approximately only around about 2 kilos or 1 or 2 kilos, yeah. This slide shows a great many, industrial developments which have come up in the last 25 to 30 years in this area, right? So all these, the thermal power stations, there are at least 2 thermal power stations which are functioning, 3 more which are being built, yeah. There are oil storage, crude oil storage terminals, yeah. And there's already a port, you see, here, yeah. One port which is a public sector port, and a second port which has been added in 2013 here, yeah, which is now sought to be expanded to this extent, right? So because of the low-lying nature of the landscape, they'll be forced to fill up the entire area of the project with dredged earth, yeah. And they'll be raising it by approximately 3 to 6 meters, yeah, in order to prevent whatever infrastructure there and use that they are planning for the port facility, yeah, from flooding, right? Now that is going to obstruct basically the drainage of the entire region, yeah, which is, how do you say, I mean, drained by this river. Hosostalayar, in fact, the basin is around about 2,000 square kilometers. And the entire, you see, monsoonal rains, it's not a perennial river. During the monsoon, it will have to drain through this creek. Yeah. And then basically this is a large holding area, yeah, which fills up during the monsoon and flood whenever there is a flood, you see. And then it will drain out through this estuary here. And then further where it will join basically the Palaverkad lake. That's a brackish water lake, one of the largest lakes, brackish water lakes, natural lakes in Southeast Asia. Yeah. So you can see that how do you say, the extent of this particular project, which is outlined in red, is much larger than the existing projects, which may be typically around about, say, 150 acres or 200 acres or so, maybe a maximum of about 350 acres. But this is seeking to take away something like 6,000 acres, yeah, from the estuary. So the need for the port, yeah, aside, I think that the most important question is, you see, the choice of to build such a huge infrastructural, you see, facility in basically an estuarine region, right? To take away land from the estuary, to make basically, how do you say, speculative real estate available, industrial real estate available. Because I will show you, yeah, in this slide, you can see again the areas that it will want to take away from the sea and then from the inland area. And here you can see the light yellow portions, yeah, are basically multi-purpose backup and industrial development areas. So they are not directly port related, you see, areas, and they constitute something like 65% of the project's, you see, land proposal needs, right? So if anything, yeah, the project is primarily an attempt to take over, yeah, cheaply available land, yeah, which is being termed and how do you say, presented as, you see, wastelands. And it will displace, you see, countless numbers of people who depend on these commons, yeah, for their subsistence livelihoods. You see, let me go on now to another project. I'm not going to go very much into detail about this project, but this is basically to support the port. They are proposing a road, you see, which will be approximately around about 125 kilometers long. You see, the port is somewhere here, you see, to the eastern end of this map, right? And this road is primarily meant to, you see, service freight traffic from Bangalore city, which is another huge metropolitan city in the southern peninsula, you see, in India, directly to the ports north of Chennai, you see. This expressway will, you can see from the map, it traverses a region, yeah, which is, you see, I mean, pockmarked with tanks, you see. So you can see several tanks, you see, thousands of tanks in this slide, yeah. And the fact that all these tanks, almost 10% or 100% of these tanks have been built by people to facilitate irrigation, yeah, for their agriculture over 1,000 years ago, from 1,000 to 700 years ago. Yeah, you have this traditional irrigation system, which is extremely, you see, versatile. Yeah, and it still remains in use even today, except that over the last 40 or 50 years, it has been supplemented with, you see, a whole lot of thousands of bore wells, yeah, which have accessed groundwater. Yeah, after electricity, you see, became widely available in villages in these parts, right? And the tanks have fallen partially into disuse, but they still support at least one or more than one crop every year, you see. Yeah. Now, coming back to the port area, yeah, you can see here the thermal power plants that I had mentioned, and the huge, you see, pipeline, you see, networks to convey fly ash from the thermal power plants into fly ash ponds. You can see here there are some fly ash ponds, and you can see abandoned houses, you see. So the village was not taken over. It was not, I mean, but it was physically, how do you say, it was displaced because of the pollution, the incredible pollution that, you see, leached out from the, you see, from the fly ash ponds, yeah. And you can see the thermal power plant's chimney behind, yeah. And you can see that people simply had to leave their houses and move away, you see, yeah. You can see here, I mean, the fields covered by, you see, fly ash and crops that have been, you see, lost because of the fly ash pollution, right? Another picture of the abandoned houses in Chepakam, which is, you see, one of the villages that is facing issues because of the rapid development, you see, industrial and infrastructural development, yeah, on the periphery of Chennai. But without regard for the, you see, inhabitants of the villages into which these infrastructural facilities were introduced. You see, they were not meant for them. You see, another picture of the fly ash pond. You see, the water in the pond looks extremely, you see, attractive, ultramarine in its hue, but it is very, very toxic. Yeah, yeah. Here you can see the derricks of the port beyond the fly ash ponds. You see, this is the existing port which is going to be expanded. Yeah, and as I told you, almost 2/3 of the expansion is meant for you see, multi-purpose industrial use, which apart from cryogenic facilities and you see crude oil storage. And you see cryogenic storage tanks and stuff like that, which is directly for port you see needs. Yeah. We find that most of the area is being requisitioned basically to support you see real estate speculation. Yeah. Here again you can see a picture of the coastal you see regulation zones. Yeah. Where the project very clearly, you see, impinges on a very, very fragile ecology, right? And you can see the, you see some of the tanks at the end of this river system, right? You can see very clearly here that the tank has several channels which are supply channels to the fields moving eastwards, right? And how they drain into the low-lying, you see, areas of the river, right? And you can see that the project boundary, when it is built, yeah, and when this area is filled up, yeah, how it will, in fact, prevent the draining of the water from the tank into the river, right? And therefore, this is a settlement here, you see. So you can imagine the plight of this settlement, which will be stuck between maybe a boundary wall here and filling, which will maybe about 3 or 4 meters or 5 meters high, right? It will be absolutely, you see, flood prone. Yeah. Okay. So let me show you some pictures now of the commoning and customary livelihoods of the people in these villages. Yeah. So we undertook a study along with the people living there. Yeah. And they showed us, you see, where they caught fish and prawn in the estuary, yeah? And where they grazed goats and their cattle, where they had farmland which grew paddy, yeah? And the farmland was both, you see, freehold land as well as commons which they had, which landless and very marginal farmers were also farming, right? So in this, I mean, slide, you can see in one village, it's a very small village called Ramanathapuram with only 110 households, you see. You can see that they are using several hundreds of acres, you see. The legend may not be very clear, but this hatched portion of the estuary, yeah, is where they catch prawn and fish, you see. It's approximately around about, say, 9 kilometers long, right? Yeah? This is around about, say, 4.5 or 5 kilometers wide, right? So they traverse this entire length, yeah, and they have ways of sharing, you see, the different, you see, times of the season when different villages will, you see, will have the rights to, prawn farming. You see, do traditional prawn farming, of which you can see tanks here. You see, so they just, I mean, impound water and brackish water which flows in because of the tide. You see, and that water is impounded for maybe 2.5 months, and then the prawn which is trapped in the impounded area is harvested. You see, at the end of that period, right? So this is I mean, in fact, opposite to commercial prawn farming, which introduces species into the environment, and then feed, and then there is feed and also antibiotics to, you see, to ensure that they grow to a certain size before they are primarily exported. This is not like that. This is basically traditional prawn farming with the existing, you see, marine life. So this is basically a picture where you can see, I mean, several hundreds of acres, in fact, a total of 1,300 and odd acres being used by just 110 households, right? In grazing. These green areas are basically grazing areas, right? These are the prawn farming, you see, impounded tanks. And this is the fish and, you see, prawn harvesting areas, right? This is yet another village called Urnambede. Yeah. Again, here I've actually shown it in two maps. So the first map basically shows this is the settlement with the tank and the channels that I had showed you. Yeah, and this is the settlement, and here you have the agricultural lands in the common lands. Yeah, here are the green shows the grazing lands. Yeah, and you can also see in this clouded portion there places where flamingos you see nest. You see in the estuary, right? So it's such a, how do you say, symbiotic relationship that people have maintained over several generations, right? That wildlife are not threatened in terms of being able to use these, you see, these same territories, yeah, for nesting and feeding. Right? This is a second map of the same village and its customary use, basically because of the extent of, you see, again, fish and prawn catch from the river. This is approximately around about, you see, approximately around about 900 acres. And about 1,300 acres in this yellow hatch, you see, shows you salt pans, you see. So here are some pictures of the paddy fields in the villages on the western banks of the estuary. Yeah. And you can see how fertile the lands are, right? Right? And these are some pictures of the herding, yeah, with buffaloes and indigenous cattle and thousands of goats. Yeah. And then to end the presentation, some pictures of the fishing and the prawn catching by hand. So you can see them wading into the water. Yeah. And more than, how do you say, 90% of those involved in the fishing and prawn catching, inland fishing and prawn catching, they are not fishing communities. See, they are basically peasant communities who are also involved in fishing. Yeah. 90% of them are women, right? And we have seen women as old as 75 and 80 continuing to fish, you see. They have been double, but they still go for a couple of hours, you see, to catch prawn and fish in these environments. You can see the small baskets that they are, you see, that they affix to their heads, yeah, and then they can, how do you say, harvest the prawn or fish from the bed of the river and then put it into the basket, you see. So these are the how do you say, insights and the how do you say, the outcomes of the study that we made. Yeah, you can see here that they are moving in water which is almost 4.5 feet deep, approximately about 1.2 meters, you see, deep. Yeah, and they're still able to how do you say, dunk in and pick up crabs and prawn, right? See, they are extremely well versed with the paths in the river underwater. You see, not all paths are negotiable on foot, because they can be how do you say, hidden marshes and also deep portions in which one could even drown. So they are they have, I mean, certain routes along which they can, you see, undertake their work, you see, without any risk to their, you see, to their lives. Yeah? And in fact, most people who are engaged, here you see a picture of the flamingos nesting against the backdrop of the developments on the eastern side of the river. Yeah. And lastly, this is a slide showing basically their how do you say, their use of very small tackle, fishing tackle nets, you see. Very, I mean, I was reminded of this when Eco was showing, you see, pictures of the museum, in his Museum of Ordinary Things, you see. Basically, they have a wonderful contraption which is like a huge bow. Yeah, it's approximately around about 4.5 meters or 15 feet in span. Yeah, and the net is stretched across the bow, and then they are walking through the water, and you see, sifting the water with that huge, you see, kind of sieve, right? I haven't got pictures of that, but basically this slide was meant to also, I mean, present certain facts of the you see, enclosure of land that belonged to one village, Urnambed village, yeah, who lost 150 acres recently. I mean, about 20 years ago, they lost it to basically for a fly ash pond, for a thermal power station, yeah. And 156 families, I'm sorry, 111 families lost land, but only 89 families were given, you see, permanent jobs in the electricity, in the thermal power station. Yeah, but even in those people's houses, you see, where they hold permanent jobs, which are very few. Yeah, there are older people who are still involved in the customary livelihoods. They have goats and they are still rearing, you see, animals. Yeah. They can't depend only on the salaries paid by the, you see, by the industrial jobs that they hold, because those jobs are often at a very, very low level, you see, in the job hierarchy. Yeah, and they are paid maybe only half of what they will need to support a family's expenses over a month, right? So thank you for that opportunity, Thein and others. Basically, if I can move on now to, how do you say, answering some of the questions posed by your prospective participants in this call for ideas. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and considering that we have very little time left, and we just wanted to kind of bring like 1 or 2 questions from the participants who've been sending us questions in social media. First things, I'll actually start with Dr. Alice, who's starting in a few minutes. Thank you so much, Dr. Alice, for joining us. We try to keep it, but thank you so much for joining us, and it was a great presentation. We'll definitely send you screenshots of it.
Thank you so much to everyone. I'm really sorry, but unfortunately I have another meeting starting basically right now, and so I really thank you once again to fantastic non-urbanism team, and to the colleagues for the very, very insightful and very also inspiring presentation. So I really looking forward to meeting you soon for the jury, and I wish good luck to all participants. I think it's going to be very, 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 very enriching and very, very interesting to see your work. And sorry, I have to leave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep me updated. Thank you.
For your day.
Yes, Gideon, will you be able to unmute and then ask the questions? We've saved up some of the questions from the participants for the past 1 hour during the webinar, and of course, in social media. One of the very interesting questions that Mr. He's asked that as a civil engineer, this is directed at Mr. Echo. As a civil engineer, how can we promote ruralism within their own development? Mr. Echo, this is a question for you.
Well, thank you so much for the question. Um, I believe that every community or every society which already living in a particular place, they already build a very intimate relationship with the place, with the geo, with the earth, I think, and usually they have so much knowledge about how to work or how to use the potential of the of the place to support their work. So they have um, different kind of knowledge, and I think we should that use that knowledge that they already have rather than introducing something from our own, which maybe it's not yet tested. But I would rather encourage you to to learn closely from what they already have and what already they practice for such a long time. And I think that local knowledge is very important and significant. Yeah, thank you.
I hope that answers your question. Gideon, you have one more question that you wanted to share with us?
Yes, there was one more question, quite simple but complex, I think. The question was, what will happen if all the places are totally urbanized? It sounds simple, but quite complex. I think, Dr. Techi, if you could start with an answer.
Thank you, Gideon. I think here it will be influenced by my research and teaching philosophy. One, I don't believe in our world being totally urbanized. Somehow, somewhere, when you look at the principles of design, even the urbanized want places where they can have their tents and go for their camps during summer holidays. So if every place is urbanized, it means our society will not be complete. So I don't foresee our world being totally urbanized, because a time will come where development planning professionals will consciously plan to protect rural areas to maintain their rural characteristics, to serve the purpose that they are supposed to perform. So I don't foresee our world being totally urbanized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was quite straightforward. And if I could ask the last question, maybe Sudhir sir can take this. And the question was, a sense of identity and collective living is a central aspect of most of our rural areas. This being both tangible and intangible, obviously. What are the tools and methods we as outsiders have to come up with a very epic and rooted approach while dealing with rural issues, such as loss of identity, the stress of migration, and abandonment of villages?
Yeah, thank you, Gideon. I think Echo also pointed out, you see, that a loss of self-respect or identity is, I think, a very, very common, you see, outcome or fallout of the processes of development that have been, you see, promoted over the last 50 years or so, right? And this is extremely, I think, how do you say, concerning. Yeah, like, I mean, there is a problem in the sense that the younger generation are attracted by urban, you see, tropes. Yeah, and the kind of you see, appearance of urban life. Yeah, but I mean, and the fact that how do you say, rural resources have been I mean, appropriated extensively in order to accumulate, you see, those resources in urban development, right? This has affected the opportunities, yeah, in customary livelihoods. And therefore, I mean, older people involved in customary livelihoods have themselves, you see, prevented younger people from their own communities, you see, joining their, you see, ranks, and said, and asked them to go to school and to go to university and find jobs elsewhere, right? But that has been happening for the last almost, you see, 40 years or so, 40 or 50 years. But over the last 10 or 15 years, those educated, you see, youth from rural backgrounds are finding that they are not getting jobs, you see, that the job market is in fact shrinking, you see, in the explosion of, you see, urban growth, yeah. It is a paradox, yeah. But basically, it is a very real concern, as many people who are highly educated, including engineers, yeah, in Tamil Nadu, yeah, have been on the bench for several years now, you see, with no work, right? And so the lack of, you see, being rooted, you see, they are neither here nor there now, you see, because they have lost touch with their customary practices. You see, most people involved in customary practices are over 40 years old or 40, 45 years old, right? Yeah. And very few young people are, you see, attracted to it because of the extremely narrow, you see, space left for them. You see, I mean, not physically, but in terms of the returns. You see. So, I mean, distress migration is a very, very, you see, how do you say, very huge reality in these, you see, urban, I'm sorry, in these rural hinterlands, yeah, and whole villages are emptying out, but certainly not for the, I mean, it's not comparable to the kind of situation that Antonio spoke about in Spain, yeah, where, I mean, the entire community is, you see, already enjoying certain basic levels of consumption, right? Here, the levels of consumption are extremely skewed in the global south, especially in Asia, Africa, and in Latin America, right? And therefore, this migration is basically not out of aspirational, you see, for aspirational reasons, but basically because of lack of opportunities in these rural areas, yeah. Because of the you see, pressure on the on resources, yeah, for urbanization and development, right? And like somebody, I mean, who posed the question as to what if the entire world was urbanized? You see, this is something that's physically impossible. Yeah, why is it physically impossible? I mean, it's quite clear that the kind of resources that would support the urbanization that we are familiar with and have been familiar with over the last 20 or 30 years, you see, that level of infrastructure, that level of consumption is certainly not possible to expand, you see, even over the next 10 years. You see, there are, I mean, umpteen examples all over the world of shortage of fresh water for drinking, right? Shortage of, I mean, resources for building, including, you see, sand and limestone, yeah. Shortage of timber, yeah. So I don't think it's a fantasy to think of, you see, an unending growth of urban centers, right? So, I mean, rural, you see, life is in no danger of disappearing, you see, in that sense. But it's extremely, how do you say, unstable. It's extremely, I mean, distressing and unstable. And because of the, how do you say, impetus to migrate, yeah, and the fact that, you see, the commons have been appropriated over the last 20, 30 years, yeah, and that customary livelihoods have been sort of strangled, you see, into subsistence, yeah, to a subsistence zone. Yeah, you have this phenomenon where, you see, people don't know any longer, you see, where, I mean, where they belong. you see, especially the younger generation, right? I think, which is which is why it is very important, yeah, that the participants in this open call for ideas, you see, are able to find collaborators in the rural areas that they, you see. It so happens that, I mean, almost all the participants are likely to be from urban and basically privileged and educated classes, yeah. And therefore, they will have to make that extra effort, yeah, in order to be able to, you see, join hands with young people in rural areas, yeah, to be able to, how do you say, for instance, in the kind of mapping exercise that we did, yeah, it's not at all impossible to find many young people in rural areas with smartphones, yeah, and they are also able to, how do you say, negotiate the internet and download apps which are including, you see, geographical information, GIS, you see, apps which will allow them to map their use of the commons, yeah. But who will show them how to do this? Yeah, surely there's a role for, you see, the educated and privileged, you see, professionals of today, you see, because all of us are in the same boat. It's not that, you see, rural areas are facing distress that we will not face, you see. That distress is almost at our doorstep and is in fact like a Damocles sword hanging over our heads, you see. Yeah. So, I mean, let me hand the field back to Gideon, yeah, to see if there are any more questions.
Thank you very much, Tutor. We are taking a last question. We have so many questions and we apologize for not responding to all, but this last question goes to Mr. Antonio. I think this ties directly to your garden city concept. And the question is saying, how can we protect the ecosystem as well as people's economic development? If you could briefly elaborate a bit on it.
Okay, so the question is, I see, is how could we protect the ecosystem as well as people's economic development? So I think that sometimes many people want to impose a kind of development to the detriment of the existing ecosystem. So my suggestion is that instead of imposing something new or something that is very difficult to match with the ecosystem that is existing there and is part of the local identity, for example, as Sudhir and Echo, even Taki, all of you said before, which I totally agree that it's very important to preserve and to encourage the existing way of a local identity. So in this kind of rural environments, the ecosystem could be one of the most important local identities of the location. So in my view, one of the ways to avoid erasing this kind of ecosystem impulse of economic development, I think that should be something like creating synergies between the existing ecosystem and a new way of production. For example, it's something like, I don't know if some of you know the principles of Patrick Getz, who was the father of regional development or regional planning. So he said that something like the valley section. I don't know if you know this kind of analysis about the regional situation, regional planning. So it should be something like establishing synergies between the existing ecosystem. Maybe it could be through woodlands or farmland or for different kind of means of production in connection with other kind of chains of production that could improve this kind of existing ecosystem in future populations. So my suggestion is to create synergies between the existing ecosystem and a new way of production or a new way of development, but avoiding ignoring the existing ecosystem that is establishing in these kind of communities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antonio. That was a quite good response. We have to apologize for not getting all the questions now. I think we have surpassed our time limit. We will try and respond to all of the questions and put up probably a PDF on our website. So please, coming days, please check it out. We'll respond to all your queries. Okay.
To all the panelists, there was also a request if some of you will be able to share the presentations that you've shared with us today to all of them. If we would be able to coordinate with the professors and the speakers, if they were to share the presentation, we will definitely send them to you, but it's available in YouTube. So you can view the presentation over and over again, as many times you want for references. But quickly to conclude this wonderful webinar, which is a great experience for us as an organization, because this is our first webinar. And based on the interactions we've had with them individually and now collectively at the webinar, we truly believe that you were able to share some of the insightful messages and tools that we've had the pleasure of having with them personally. Starting from, how we talked about healing the environment with Dr. Alice, or you can even focus on the asymmetries that Mr. Echo talked about, or even work on the flexibility and the creativity of solutions that are already existing in the rural, and then, reframing them or making it more accessible in your own way. So this is all for the participants who are, working on their suggestions right now. But one more important thing, very, very important thing that we've also learned today with Mr. Antonio is that you can always look back and work on the theories that have been here for a long, long time and reframe them to current sustainable concerns and the future of how we can perceive the non-urban areas with Dr. Tachi, about how to just like, first of all, differentiate the peri-urban and the non-urban, and how to co-design, co-produce, and how to work with them so that they also have their aspirations and culture defined and then identified. And lastly, with Mr. Sudhir, you can just get on the ground and work with them and and find ways to interact and kind of build on a synergy, build on a framework from which you learn as much as they learn, or you expect them to. I think this was collectively, this was wonderful for us organizers, for participants, and we are very, very excited to have the call for non-urban idea entries. You can find more information about it on our website. I think it will be redirected right after the webinar today. I thank each and every one of you individually and the panelists for your time and energy and work that you've put in the presentation. It was truly an honor to have all of you with us today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you all the participants, the questions, surveys, everything. We will follow up with emails. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you much. Thank you very much.
All right. Nice meeting you all, and enjoy your
rest of your. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.